2 years in, and I do not regret going with the F4 version of the 70-200 at all. I've packed this for Ireland, Ottawa, my road trip across the country, and many more local trips since my first reviews, and it's a great time for a check-in. Things change, the Canon landscape has changed, but previously, I made a pretty strong recommendation to go with the F4 version of this lens over the F2.8 version of this lens. For most people, I praised it for its svelte physique and tested the autofocus and low light performance on the R6 in some scenarios new to me, namely sports. The full context and really the backbone of how you think about a traditional review video is in those vids. Save them for watch later if you can't hit them next, but this channel is all about reviewing gear in a long-term, contextual way. We're just hanging out, low clickbait, high value. Today, let's touch on the choice between the F4 version and the F2.8 version. We'll touch on why I find this great for travel. In all my example shots, we can look at the bokeh and the subject background separation, and we'll wrap up with 4 quick hit considerations, and we'll use an example shot from the Jameson Distillery in Dublin to kind of bring everything together. But Dan, I have that F2.8 FOMO. Trust me, I had this too. That's the entire reason I wanted to try both, and I know that so many people have this same fear. Several skeptical viewers even commented months later asking if I had traded in the F4 for the F2.8 and didn't bother telling anybody about it. That's obviously not the case, but for some, and probably even many, it feels like a high stakes choice between the two different lenses. It might be the most expensive gear purchase to date for some, or it might be your first L lens, with the exception of the R6. This was also my biggest gear purchase to date, and I think since. In my mind, the best way I can recommend thinking about these two lenses is not that the F2.8 version is better than the F4 version. Viewing them like that maybe made sense in the past when there was a bigger difference in one stop of light between the two lenses. Maybe this is a spicy take, I hope not, but I think it's better to think of those two lenses as equal on the same plane of L quality. And instead of choosing better or worse, you're choosing to fit your needs. Events, sports, wildlife over here, landscape and travel over here. And if you don't need to play over here, you can save yourself $1,000 if you're more on this side of things. And we don't need to drag this video to 10-15 minutes to see why this lens is still a great choice for me. The best part about this lens, and I'll elaborate more in a minute, it makes up half of a strong travel combo. Before this lens, I took what felt like at the time a big bet on building my kit around the 24-105. I quickly came to appreciate the value and versatility in such a compact footprint. When I bought the 70-200, I doubled down on that F4 zoom philosophy and haven't felt the urge to swap out for the F2.8 at all. But that travel combo is the best part about this lens because it pairs so well with other great RF options. Complement this lens in the right way and you get maximum coverage and can fit it all in a tiny bag. The RF 35mm macro, for instance, gives you something smaller, faster, and lighter, and these work as a great combo. The new 24mm macro or the 28mm pancake would give you a similar complement that's travel friendly. The EF Sigma 28 isn't small, but it'll also be a great wide and fast complement, and it's what I've ultimately turned to for its build quality and its astro capabilities. And then obviously the 24-105 L gives you great coverage at F4 from 24 all the way up to 200 with just 2 lenses. I often will pair these two as my travel combo, and I'll cheat and sneak in the nifty 50 because it's hard not to fit that or afford that one. And similar concept with the 24-105 STM. If you can manage with that and fit that in your bag, you can go even smaller. So maybe you're convinced you're on board with the stop of light that you're gonna lose when you choose this 70-200 F4 over the 70-200 F2.8, but you're still a little bit concerned about the separation you'll be able to get between your subject and background. To that, I might say, how you place yourself as the shooter, how you place your subject, how you place your background, and what focal length you're using, all of those factors are going to have a greater impact on how your background looks than the simple swap from F4 to F2.8. Certainly, there are always times when you can't, or it's harder to, control the distances between you and your subject. In those cases, within this focal range, it's my opinion that the magic in separation doesn't happen in jumping from F4 to F2.8, but it happens when jumping below F2.8. And neither 70-200 option is going to get you there. 85mm conveniently falls in this range, So I have a couple examples using this. So I had my own doubts about how I could control the look of my images based on my subject and background placement with the F4. And I think for some people, if you really want to obliterate those backgrounds, it might be best to solve that with two different lenses. For me, adding a fast, affordable 85 to complement the 70-200 F4 was my best option. And as you contemplate this, like I said, the landscape has changed, and the new option that you have available in native RF is the 135. If you really need more light or a different look, that lens would complement the F4 zoom really well. Bigger, heavier, more expensive, sure, but if you think you can get away without a zoom in this range, then that lens starts to become super appealing. And let's play devil's advocate for the F2.8 for a second, if you still want to go with the 70-200. If you go into the 70-200 F2.8 and you recognize that it's a compromise, that is, F2.8 still isn't going to be fast enough for some of your use cases, and you know that you're going to be carrying around more weight than you probably want in some situations, consolidating with one F2.8 is still much more compact than going with the F4 and an 85. And I think there's legitimate value in making that compromise, knowing that it might not excel in both use cases, because it's just better to have one lens sometimes if you want to declutter your bag. My default purchasing behavior across camera gear and largely tech would usually be to grab that F2.8 and keep things simplified. But in my case, I really wanted the advantages of this lens for travel and portability, and I really wanted to still be able to create that look and drop down below F2.8 in situations where I'm really struggling for light. And here are the 4 last points to consider based on my experience. First, durability. The build has held up great. I've got some scuffs on the hood. Otherwise, this looks brand new, and I've used it often. It's probably my favorite lens if I had to choose. I got several DMs on Instagram after people had bought this lens. The internal barrel does wobble around. That's normal until it's paired with your body and the IS engages. The zoom ring feels good after 2 years. It doesn't feel loosened at all, and I'm not having any issues with dust or moisture getting sucked into the lens, given the external zoom design. Second, some people might mistakenly buy a 70-200 when they really want a 100-400. Very different lenses, very different price points, very different apertures. But if you need 400 millimeters to start dabbling in what you like to shoot on the long end, 200 will just feel sad. I just started playing with this 100-400 myself. I might not keep it, but I'll definitely be talking about this later in the summer. And I could see how maybe I might make that mistake earlier in my shooting career if I hadn't dabbled with some rentals. So definitely something to consider if you're jumping right into wildlife or particularly birds. Even 400 is going to be a little tough to jump into some of those scenarios. Third, I love having that 70-105 millimeter overlap when I decide to pack this lens and the 24-105. If I look through my Ireland catalog, there's a lot that I took on the 24-105 beyond 70. It just keeps me from swapping lenses less often when I decide to pack both. And for me, I usually feel a lot more confident if I decide to pack only one or the other, knowing that no matter the choice, I'm still getting that 70-105. And finally, Lightroom has changed a lot in the last 2 years. 2 of the biggest changes: for one, it's never been easier to make complex masks, make those selections quickly, and give your subject a chance to stand out from the background. So if you're really after getting your subject to pop, there are other ways to start achieving this look beyond simply upgrading hardware. And 2, more recently, Adobe has rolled out some denoise tools. So we'll wrap up at Jameson, but I've never used other tools or plugins for noise, as I like to keep my workflow mostly Lightroom with a little bit of Photoshop if needed. And it's not the snappiest. It definitely takes a few seconds even on this M2 MacBook Pro, but we increasingly have powerful ways to clean up shots taken at f4 in low light. This shot was coincidentally taken at 85 millimeters using the 24-105, so not exactly this lens, but it could have been. Again, living in that 70-105 overlap. At ISO 5000 inside, it's still a simple snapshot, but this is an example of a shot that I'd rather take on my 85 at maybe f2, though at f4, it's actually kind of nice to get some legibility of the barrel brand. You wouldn't want to be running all of your images through this denoise. It would take a while and it would be a nightmare. But it's good to know that there are increasingly better ways of achieving a certain look through software, even if you don't maybe have the exact hardware that you'd want for any given shot in any given context.